because right through the center of the country was a U.S. colony. And for Panamanians to go there, they had to show IDs, and very, very disturbing situation. So many protests, many struggles to gain sovereignty over the canal, in famous riots in the middle of 1964 in January, and the U.S. soldiers killed 5 people who were flying the Panamanian flag in the canal. So the Panama Canal Treaty was signed in 1967 between Torrijos and Carter, from the U.S. And it marked a change, I think, in U.S. relations. There was a lot of opposition of ratification in the U.S. Senate. So at that time, they also added a neutrality treaty. The Tratado de Neutralidad, neutrality treaty, guaranteed permanent neutrality of the canal and allowed U.S. to use military force in the canal. Now it's interesting, today we see Trump using this language from the neutrality treaty to try and at least attempt to say the U.S. is going to regain. Anyway, this treaty allowed for a gradual return to Panama of properties in the canal. Last day of the century, first 1999, all of the canal properties were, including 14 U.S. military bases. So the operations of the canal, here we see on the right the old locks. Because maybe it was because of lack of. Yes. Yeah. Okay, let's see it. That's, yeah. It's only 2 minutes. 3 minutes.
Uma das zonas de conflito eleitas pelo presidente americano é o Canal do Panamá. O diário especial do Jornal da Band, o Gilberto Esmanhoto, mostra agora o que está em jogo em uma das áreas mais estratégicas para
Nós vamos entrar agora no Canal do Panamá, uma das maiores obras de engenharia já construídas. O Canal do Panamá é um ponto estratégico da navegação mundial.
O Canal do Panamá é o portão que liga os 2 principais oceanos e 2 regiões estratégicas para a segurança militar, segurança do comércio, de acesso aos insumos.
Those are the old ones. Those are the new ones.
Permitiu a passagem de navios para a América do Sul. Ele funciona por meio de um sistema de cruzes, como elevadores de água subterrâneas, para que possam atravessar. Por conta do canal, as embarcações encurtam a viagem a quilômetros.
It's not sea level.
Esses navios chegam a quase 2.000 portos em 170 países.
A bandeira completamente vermelha significa que transporta carga inflamável.
Em média, uma embarcação paga de 200 a 400 mil dólares para passar. Pode chegar a muito mais.
É necessário que cruze, porque a carga a bordo pode perecer. Entra no leilão e paga um pouco mais.
O canal representa o país. Panamá como panamenho, curioso de ter o Canal do Panamá. Mas desde que Donald Trump assumiu o poder, ele vem prometendo retomar o controle do canal. Mas como assim? O canal foi construído com dinheiro americano, na época em que Panamá estava independente da Colômbia. Mas ele olha no
norte-americana. O novo governo panamense estabeleceu após a independência, autorizou que os Estados Unidos não apenas construíssem o canal, como também que os Estados Unidos tivessem soberania e controle daquele canal.
Inaugurado em 1914, ela foi controlado pelos Estados Unidos quase um século. Em 1909, Panamá assumiu a gestão total da rota.
O objetivo é reduzir as taxas que são altas de circulação dos navios americanos e conseguir taxas preferenciais, especialmente em relação à China. Então, quando a gente fala de guerra comercial entre China e Estados Unidos, é uma meia-verdade, porque não é estritamente uma guerra comercial, é uma guerra por poder. O comércio é parte desse poder. O Canal do Panamá está ali num dos centros mais estratégicos.
So I think the video gives a sense of how the canal operates. Much of the travel is from Asia, East Asia, from China, Japan, also Europe to East Asia. Chile, Peru to the East. Very important for economy. And the authority, Panama Canal Authority, operates the canal with a significant autonomy, political autonomy guaranteed by. So the middle of the canal is a freshwater lake built by damming the Chinese River. The water flows by gravity down through the locks to lower ships to the Atlantic. Lake Gatun was, when it was created in 1914, 1913, the largest reservoir in the world. Not anymore, but it was. There is also another reservoir that was built in 1935, damming the Chinese River upstream for water security. Mentioned locks, the old locks, the original locks, 3 steps up to Lake Gatun and 3 steps. There are new locks opened in 2016 to allow larger vessels to Panama. I also mentioned that the original locks use fresh water from Lake Gatun, but that water is lost. Transit involves 100 million liters of water that are lost. So here you see a transect, vertical transect going up to Lake Gatun on the right. And as I mentioned, the size of the vessel that would fit in the chambers, the old original chambers, were called Panamax vessels. They're built to fit in the chamber. Only a few centimeters, 10. They can carry 4,500 TEUs, which are containers. The standard size of a container is 20 liters. With the new locks, the new chambers, Neo-Panamax, longer and can carry 12,000 20-foot equivalent units, 12,000 containers. So we see the old locks on the left, the new locks on the right. And the new locks recycle water with these recycling called water saving basins. Not all of the water in the ocean. With these first environmental issue, which is Lake Gatun, a freshwater lake, but salinity is increasing since the new locks were opened 10 years ago. One big environmental issue. Here we see this recent paper, Castellon, line on the horizontal axis, and salinity in Oxford. Practical salinity units. And 2016, opening of the new locks with recycling. So these are net average salinity through numerous stations in Lake Gatun. And we see a large increase in salinity to up to a maximum of 0.5 or 0.6 parts per ppt, which may not seem like a big problem, but it is a problem if you're drinking water or if you're a fish. So more data from this paper, and we see different points in Lake Gatun. So on the top, I think, starting on the left is the Atlantic salinity. Then moving to the middle of Lake Gatun salinity. And then when you get close to the new locks on the salinity. So suggesting that salinity is coming from the water exchange new locks. And here also the same paper has Andy depth average salinity Lake Gatun before and after. Before is A in the top. Salinity is low throughout the lake. On the right, the average depth average salinity after the new locks, and the top end, which is near the Ohuli, the Atlantic new locks. And this is looking, but fair. Isolate. So that little finger, which is. And bottom C and D are the frequency of salinity exceeding freshwater standards or after the increase in salinity on both sides near the new locks exceeding drinking water standards. And not surprising that there is a correlation between salinity and lake water levels over the dry season. So salinity generally tends to increase during these times. Low water levels are during the dry season, and that's when also the relationships between the Nino years, dry season, seemingly dry seasons, and explain this later. So on to fish for biologists. And we know marine fish introductions into Lake Gatun. So here are 3 different marine species that have entered freshwater lake. So Lake Gatun, historically a freshwater lake, and back in the last century, we see a population dynamic change between native freshwater species introduced tilapia, peacock bass, tilapia were introduced and are exceedingly abundant in Lake Gatun. However, now with the new locks opening in 2016, in these water reuse chambers, there's increased likelihood that marine species are entering or have entered and the danger is that they will cross from oceans. Not only in Lake Gatun, but will also be interoceanic. So Castellanos and Galindo et al. This year, a month ago, their fish before, after the opening of, and here's the paper. Re-expansion, as I've already mentioned, we see this change native freshwater fish, but these expansion results show that tilapia and sargento account for 7% of the biomass. Marine species 26%. So they've also been introduced for 26% of total biomass. Native species, freshwater species 17%. After from 2019 to 2023, the marine species, this one, southern ladyfish, accounting for 76% of the total biomass in the lake. Introduced freshwater species, native freshwater species. So obviously a higher functional diversity. And the marine species are carnivore, pelagic species, and native freshwater species seem to be absent. Changing community dynamics, change in ecosystem functions. The species have entered more from the Atlantic, the Caribbean, that's from the Pacific. They have entered. What are some of the implications besides interoceanic transfers? There's the food web, of course, which has not really been well studied in Lake Gatun. Of course, there will be changes in food web. A number of small-scale artisanal fishers and on-site tapia for sale, and their family community economy. There are a number of recreational fishers, anglers that fish for tarpon. Lake Gatun, so this is for recreation. These people may lose this group. What about drinking water? Because Panama City and Colon on the Atlantic side get their drinking water from. So, is also increased. So in 2000, a little over 1.2 million people in Panama metropolitan. And now there are 2 million people in Panama City, and obviously the population doesn't seem like much compared to Sao Paulo. Anyway, so water demand will increase, and both of these lakes, Lake Gatun and Lake Alajuela, are the drinking waters for Panama. One of the drinking waters. This one is not in Lake Gatun. I took this Lake Alajuela, the upstream. Prior to Canal expansion, these data are also from Castellón, that paper. The average salinity prior to Canal expansion was less than 0.05. Averaging many sites, salinity around Lake Gatun. The average salinity after the expansion, 2019 to 2023, 0.21 parts per thousand. As we've already seen, is near these locks, new locks with the water exchange. Pacific side, 0.5 parts per thousand. The Caribbean side, 0.5. Well, the drinking water standards are 0.45. Salinity for drinking water. So at the box, at the entrance of the new locks, the salinity is already exceeding the drinking water standard. Of course, the water intake sites for drinking water are not at the lock. But this presents a future danger and uncertainty because, of course, water demand will increase as population increases. And salinity will increase, not only near the new locks, but further into. So this is another issue. The authority, the Panama Canal Authority, is extremely interested in protecting the watershed, attempting to make sure that forests remain so that the water supply to Lake will be constant. The Canal Authority undertakes numerous different programs to protect the water. And watershed is a political definition because by law, Panama Canal Authority has defined the water. So parks, excursion projects, and projects growing coffee cultivation. So let me explain a little bit. So this is the political definition of the canal watershed. There's our national parks. So high level, especially here, this is a primary forest in Chagares National Park. This is Soberania National Park, also highly forested. Camino de Cruces, this is the Smithsonian Tropical Research Station in Barra Bravo, an island in Lake Etu. It was a mountain. And this is Camino. So this side, the eastern side of the watershed, is highly forested. But most of the deforestation. So the Panama Canal Authority's projects largely focus on this area, deforestation projects. Chagares National Park. This is now in the canal is here. Primary forest, secondary forest. And this is one of several community-based projects in Chagares. This is my class. Take my class. March, actually. To stay a week with the community. There are about 20 families here, and they depend on fishing for tilapia and sargento, or small scale like. The park limits activities, so they cannot remove any more trees. They're limited in what they can do. It's a lot like Lake Carlos, so it reminds me very much of that, because these people were in the park before it was created. Don't have land. Very similar to and we stay there for a week. This project was supported by the Canal Authority, interested in sustainable life, by an NGO, ONGI, by Caritas. And there are also native peoples, indigenous peoples who live in the watershed around Lake Alajuela as well. And they're Embera, it's the Embera. This is from Embera Puru. And it's a different type of tourism, obviously. But I take my students. Embera Puru. Café de la Cuenca. So the Canal Authority has also provided incentives for people on the western side to cultivate coffee, to change from pasture, deforested land. So it also lively for people there, living there. And incentives could be including giving coffee bonus, small coffee. Incentives for fertilizer, markets is café. Buen café. Cuenca is la. Every time I go, so reforestation campaigns as well on the western side. Interesting uses of economic incentives for environment, reforesting land, giving pagos por ambientales to people to maintain their forested land. $100 per year per hectare. $100 per hectare per year. I guess that's not much. That is something. There are many different activities that the authority is doing to try to protect. And this video I do want to show. So here, I was playing with and here we see the Caribbean basins, northern Colombia. Predictions for perhaps less 10 or 50% less precipitation, 40 and 60 using intermediates and trade. Problems for the canal, which depends on water. And back to this chart from last week. We see drought periods, this 23, 24 drought period, water levels really, really low in the canal. And also 2017, 2018, very low. 2018, very low. Water levels were low, and this creates a problem as well, especially in this last period, 23 and 24. The authority, Canal Authority, had to reduce transits versus ships. So normally, 36 and 9 vessels go through the canal. But second half of 2023, had to reduce the number of transits to. So a significant decrease for international commerce, Canadian commerce, any other impacts. Really big problem. And of course, we also see water flows during sediment in the Amino 82. Also decrease. Now, this last season was the third driest in the canal. There was 30% less precipitation, 30% flow into lake. So let's look at this one.
Canal de Panamá es una escalera de agua, ya que moviliza los buques de un océano a otro, pero pasando del nivel del mar a un lago de navegación que está a cerca de 27 metros de elevación acumulado por el mar. Normalmente funciona con el equivalente de un cruzaje completo, es decir, del Atlántico y Pacífico. Utilizan cerca de 108.000 metros cúbicos de agua para un cruzaje completo de océano a océano o 50 millones de metros.
Water is a problem, or lack of water is increasing populations, increased numbers of ship transits, need more water. Predictions of decreased rainfall. And where is Panamá going to? So this brings us into the last, or second to the last, issue. An embalse, which is a dam, reservoir on the Rio Indio. This proposal, Canal Authority has pushed through, and it appears to be a little bit about. Well, back 20 years ago, 25 years ago, there was a proposal to dam up the Rio Indio, which is to the west of the canal. Ship that water and interbasin transfer to Lake Gatun. There was a lot of opposition to this. The watershed is political. Extended the watershed to the west to cover the Rio Indio. Idea was to reservoir. Opposition. People living there opposed it. There was a very strong group called that enjoyed support from pastoral Socioambientais. They engaged in a really good campaign against it. The idea was dropped in 2006, Law 20 voided Law 41. So we forgot about it until the new drought of 23-24. So this is the canal watershed here, legally, right? And now this is the Rio Indio watershed here. So the authority has proposed damming the Rio Indio here and building this new reservoir and shipping this water through a tunnel, 8-kilometer tunnel, to Lake Gatun to increase the amount of water in Lake Gatun. There is debate about, well, shall we do it here on the western side or over here on the eastern side where there is already a dam? And that's on the Rio Baiano. So there was a debate. Here there's already a dam, which is very controversial. It displaced a lot of people. But running the water from here to Lake Alajuela and then to Lake Gatun is 100 kilometers. And that was deemed to be very expensive. And this is much shorter and less economical, or more economical. So the Canal Authority has opted for this dam on the Rio Indio. So this would be a 4,600 hectare reservoir with a tunnel going to the Gatun. The Canal Authority wants to begin in 2027. They say the project will cost $1.6 billion. It will displace 2,500 people, 500 families. And the Canal Authority says, yes, it will compensate people, it will purchase new land and ensure that the residents have new land, et cetera, right? All the promises, as usual. So, again, there is another group very similar to the one from 20 years ago. Now it's called Coordinadora Campesina por la Vida y contra los Embalses. Of course, there are 12,000 people who live in the watershed. Not only the 2,500 people would be displaced, but people lower in the watershed would also be affected because there would not be as much water flowing in the river. So, this group appears to be initiating, requesting that the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, that we know as CIDH, would grant medidas cautelares for the affected communities. And they make the argument there that it has not been consulta previa informada. Right? And we all know that term really well. The Canal Authority has conducted a census of the residents, How many are there? How many cattle? How many chickens do they have? But that's not prior informed consent, right? The Canal Authority seems to be going ahead. Daremos la vida, campesinos rechazan el embalse. These are all from the last few months. And let's look at this video. So this is
Marcha
video
mundial en Panamá. Decenas de manifestantes protestaron en canoas a través del río Indio contra un plan para construir un embalse destinado a paliar la sequía del Canal de Panamá, que amenaza con dificultar el paso de navíos comerciales. Sin embargo, los residentes de comunidades ribereñas se oponen alegando que eso inundará las viviendas de 2.000 personas.
Afectaría en diferentes dimensiones la fauna, la vida, el extracto social, ecológico, el extracto humano. Esto nos molestaría las mejores tierras que habían sepultado bajo tierra donde está nuestro sustento de vida.
Los habitantes sugirieron que se utiliza el cercano lago Bayano, al este de la capital del país, una idea destacada por las autoridades. En la movilización, gran parte eran agricultores, quienes más quedarían perjudicados si se construye el embalse en el río Indio.
Producen todo su alimento en esa área. Entonces son casi más de 46 comunidades que van a ser afectadas, pero hay otra alternativa que es variable.
La autoridad del Canal de Panamá asegura que esta construcción es la mejor manera de proporcionar una fuente de agua adicional a más de 2 millones de personas en Ciudad de Panamá. Además, garantizaría que el paso comercial funcione eficientemente en las próximas décadas y generaría empleos para las comunidades. El proyecto está previsto que comience en 2027 y tarde 4 años en su construcción.
Sua empresa ainda usa relógio de ponto?
So it's an amazing conflict, right? Social, environmental conflict between the needs of the nation and the social impacts to poor communities. Okay. And then just finally, and Trump and what seems to have happened this year with the geopolitics of Panama. So Trump has made numerous false accusations about Panama, as you know, saying that Chinese control the canal, Chinese soldiers control the canal. And actually the Secretary of Defense went to Panama, or was it Rubio, Secretary of State, went to Panama during Chinese New Year and saw a lot of Chinese people and Chinese lanterns and all. 10% of Panamanians are Chinese, right? So maybe that's what he was thinking. But Chinese soldiers do not control the canal. The Chinese, there are 5 ports on both sides of the canal that the government has given concessions to. 2 of the ports are controlled by companies from Hong Kong or China. One is a US company, one is Singapore, and the other I can't remember. But 2 of the 6 are owned by concession by Chinese companies. Trump has said that US vessels pay more than other vessels, exorbitant fees, which is not true. The Canal Authority sets fees depending on the size of the ship. And the claim also is that Chinese influence in Panama is violating the neutrality treaty that was signed in 1978. And Trump is about to use military force to reclaim the canal, which creates a big issue in Panama because if you remember, some of you, that in 1989, the US invaded Panama. This was at the end of the Noriega dictatorship. And there was a military intervention of the US in Panama and 4,000 people were killed. So when they use language like this, then it really disturbs Panamanians, right? Remembering what happened 30 years ago. And Trump keeps adding to a lot of concessions, growing list of concessions that he wants. US Navy vessels should be reimbursed for passing through the canal. Panama should pay for US Navy ships to go through the canal. U.S. commercial vessels should get free passage, and U.S. military bases should be located near the canal. Well, this was a big thing, right? Closing U.S. military bases by 1999. And now the Panamanian president has effectively allowed 3 military bases for the U.S. to operate in 3 military bases. It's called an agreement, an accord, that the president has allowed. So, the last few months have seen major disturbances in Panama, protests and strikes, with the confluence of many different issues. Trump's statements about the canal that belongs to the U.S. and Chinese are controlling the canal, the Panamanian president's allowance of 3 U.S. military bases near the canal without a referendum or discussion in the National Assembly. Part of the concession of Panama's president was removing Panama from the Belt and Road Initiative, China's Belt and Road Initiative. And perhaps number 1 has been the passage of Law 462 that would privatize the Social Security system. We have a big issue about this very large copper mine that the Supreme Court declared illegal. The contract was illegal in 2023, and this new president has said he's going to allow this gigantic copper mine again. And the government has responded with a lot of violence against protests. So it's a very troubling time in Panama now, but the basis for all of it, I think, is Trump. And that's all I wanted to say. I think it's a really interesting example of geopolitics, but also the environmental impacts, and then the natural science issues of the water use and water quality. And fish populations too. So thanks very much.
Se alguém tiver alguma pergunta, sinta-se à vontade. Então, queria agradecer, professor. Pode perguntar, por favor.
Obrigada, muito interessante. Pode falar português?
Sim.
Eu queria te perguntar em relação a modificações, além da salinização, se também teve várias modificações em aspectos de erosão ou outras questões de sedimentação na consequência, né, dessas.
Sim. Mas acho que esse interesse é um problema, não, especialmente com terras ao ocidente do canal, terras deflorestadas, não? Que tem mais sedimentos que a Lago Gatuno. Acho que é esse o outro problema, não? E isso também ocupa mais espaço no volume de água que pode ter o lago, né?
Existe um futuro para as comunidades que vivem da pesca, nesses lagos? Existe algum futuro ou a tendência é?
Sim, acho que sim. Muitas comunidades de pescadores artesanais moram por Lago Alajuela, que não está afetado, está águas arriba do Lago Gatuno. Eles vão seguir pescando tilápias, sargento. O problema são pescadores que moram por Lago Gatuno. Não sei. As espécies marinhas não são muito comestíveis, não. Megalops, não sei o que, tarpon, não é comestível. Não.
Estrangeiro.
Sim.
E você acredita que vão criar a empresa ou
Desafortunadamente, sim, eu creo que sim. Acho que sim vai conseguir. O canal é muito forte, a autoridade do canal usa a ideia que o canal é central, a Panamá, a economia. Sim. Acho que sim. Acho que sim. Agora, é muito importante assegurar que a autoridade do canal realmente dá indenização e que compre terras iguais às terras inundadas. Sim, isso é uma luta muito importante. Que não cumpra com as promessas. A autoridade do canal cumpra com as promessas para as comunidades. Sim. Eduardo.
Na transposição das águas lá dos rios, os planos que têm transposição, e a porcentagem de água que vai sair da bacia em direção ao lago da Mundo?
Não.
Percentage of water drain from the rivers to the lagoon.
¿Qué porcentaje? Pues 100%, ¿no? Sí. Todo el agua túnez de agua dulce que viene básicamente del río Chagres. También tenemos otros ríos menores. Mas que del embalse do río Indio.
Isso, os novos.
Não sei. Lei, não sei. Mas lei que a autoridade do canal diz que o água que vem do rio Índio equivale a água perdida por 6 barcos, 6 trânsitos por dia. Assim seria.
A parte que seria transferida.
Sim. Ou equivale a. Seria
6 transferências.
55 milhões de galones, não por 6. Mas não sei.
Porque o rio Índio e o outro é o rio Embalse, né? Esses Embalse não é o nome.
O outro?
O rio.
Baiano.
Esses rios desembocam aonde? Eles vão para qual?
Rio Índio, Atlântico. Baiano, Pacífico.
E os estuários desses rios devem ser importantes?
Acho que Baiano sim, é muito importante. Porque é maior. O Índio, na verdade, é bastante pequeno. Vieram uma foto, um vídeo da protesta. E esse estuário é um rio pequeno.
Mas vai mudar completamente
sim.
Com parte dessa água sendo drenada para outro lugar.
Claro.
Com intrusão salina, com mudança de espécies, tudo dinâmico, toda.
Sim. E afeta todo o rio debaixo, águas abaixo da embalse. Sim. E isso afeta toda a gente que mora lá.
E esses estudos estão sendo. Tem estudos a respeito para saber quanto vai afetar?
Acho que não. Mas não sei. Acho que não. Pode ser que a autoridade tenha, mas também a informação não é muito fácil de conseguir.
Mas serão necessários os estudos, né?
Sim, será necessário. Sim. Desconheço estudo de impacto ambiental. E tem que existir, sim, existe.
Porque em alguma hora vai acontecer. Alguma hora eles vão pegar esses rios, a água desses rios e colocar para o Atlântico.
Sim.
Já tinha um plano em 99, aí não aconteceu. Aí agora 23, 24, seca de novo, ainda não
Se acha que vai ser uma solução tá? De décadas, né? Mas não é uma solução para sempre.
Sim. E a seca vai afetar esses rios também, não só como é o nome do que chega no Brasil. Hoje em dia não são vários, né?
Sim, Alajuela, Gatún. Sim.
O rio que chega no lago.
A Chagres, Rio Chagres, sim.
Que é o maior.
Sim. Mi argumento sempre tem sido que realmente não é necessário fazer isso, porque a distribuição de água potável na cidade é completamente ruim. Acho que perdem 50% da água, né? Na transferência, tuberías, rotas e tudo. E não existe nenhum plano de conservação de água, nada, em Panamá. Acho que seria melhor fazer campanhas de conservação de água, arreglar todo o sistema de água potável, distribuição de água potável, e não inundar a 2.000 pessoas. Mas é mais fácil fazer isso que arrumar o sistema de distribuição de água potável.
Como funciona no Panamá esses órgãos reguladores? Não sei se são estaduais, se são federais, esse regulador de.
Estadual não existe, todo é central. Se todo é governo central, mas a autoridade do canal tem autoridade exclusiva dentro da cuenca do canal. Isso é por lei, por a Constituição. Então, sim. Outros organismos, Ministério do Meio Ambiente, funcionam dentro da bacia, da cuenca, mas bajo a responsabilidade da autoridade do canal. Províncias, nada, não, nenhum poder. Tem comitê de bacia da conta, no país inteiro, mas não funciona bem.
E a sedimentação no lago Gatún é grande? Tem estudos a respeito?
Não sei. Acho que sim, deve ser um problema. E também por isso a importância de manter a floresta. Não? Mas acho que tem muitas áreas deflorestadas, anteriormente deflorestadas ao ocidente. E acho que isso deve criar um problema de sedimentação, especialmente a essa parte. Mas não afeta os barcos.
Ainda não.
Não, tem
Não precisa estragar.
canal de 17 metros a 19 metros da profundidade no centro do lago Gatún.
Obrigado.
Eu queria fazer uma última pergunta, já tem? Não sei se eu entendi direito a questão dos chineses que controlam o canal. Afinal de contas, existe um controle da China no canal?
Não.
Ou não existe?
Não existe. Não existe. Os chineses têm contrato de concessão dos portos, dois portos. Os chineses, uma companhia de Hong Kong, Hutchinson. Agora Hong Kong é China, não? Mas são concessões de operar os portos. Mas Trump disse que a água como tem informação de todos os barcos que entram, que passam por o canal e todo. Sim, mas esse não é o controle.
Fazer as fake news.
Fake news. Sim. Sí, es muy triste porque en ese sentido el gobierno de Panamá no se mantiene fuerte como Canadá, ¿no? Contra Trump o Dinamarca, ¿no? Sí, el presidente de Panamá realmente ha seguido al deseo de Trump, que es muy triste. Muito triste para muita gente em Panamá. Assim vamos ver. Bueno, muito obrigado.
Obrigada a você.
Mais uma vez eu queria agradecer a presença de todos, a palestra do professor, e gostaria de solicitar que todos os presentes, se puderem, responder o formulário de presença, para a gente ter um controle de saber quantas pessoas têm vindo e tal. E é isso, muito obrigado mesmo a todos.